Hi besties, welcome back to another video. We are back with another jam-packed video covering life sciences. Today's video we're going to focus on paper 1, and I'm going to be giving you insights onto the things you should be watching out for if you want to get good marks. Also, some of the common mistakes that learners tend to make in life sciences, particularly human reproduction. So let us get started with paper 1. I'm going to be here with my device, so don't mind that. So let us get started with life sciences. So we know that for life sciences, paper 1, it's that paper that a lot of people don't necessarily like. And I understand why. The topics are a bit, as compared to paper 2, which is a bit rosier. No? Is there anyone who prefers paper 1 over paper 2? Then let us know. The cognitive difficulty of this paper, 30% of the question paper is easy for an average learner to get. 40% is a bit moderately challenging for the average learner to answer. And then 25% of it is a bit challenging for an average learner to answer. And then 5% will be very difficult to distinguish the learners who are high achieving, extremely high achieving learners. So that would require learners who that one would be more for learners who obtain anything above an 85%. Awesome. Paper 1 Life Sciences has what? It has endocrine and homeostasis. And then it also has, my laptop is starting again. It also has responding to the environment of plants and humans. That one weighs the most. Human reproduction is the second weighing paper. It weighs 41 marks out of 150. And then there is reproduction in vertebrates, which counts 8 marks. So is it that important? Yes, because it could be a reason why you don't get a distinction. So let's get into it. So not a lot of people get distinctions for life sciences by the end of the year. So now let us get into this document. And I want you guys to be taking notes. Awesome? Awesome. I'm only going to highlight what you need to be focusing on. What is very, very critical. Okay. You need to be able to label and provide functions of various parts of the male and female reproductive system. For example, you need to know the most particular one. You need to know the seminal vesicles, the corpus gland, the scrotum, the prostate gland, the sperm duct, the urethra, and the epididymis, and the testes, and what they do. And what hormone is dominant in the male reproductive system, which is testosterone. What are its functions? We know that it is very, very crucial for the development of secondary sexual characteristics, such as the beard, the pubic hair, the deep voice, and the muscular body. And then it also is responsible for the stimulation of sperm cells. Awesome. So, questions that you could get around the male reproductive system, they could ask you to explain the process of spermatogenesis. One other way in which they could ask this is ask you about the process where there's the formation of the male gametes. Or they could tell you, explain a process where, name and explain. So if they say name and explain, it's usually 1 plus 5 marks. 1 mark is a compulsory mark for you to name the actual process. Try to be as biological as possible, especially if they ask you to name. Don't say formation of male gametes. Say spermatogenesis. What happens? It is happening under the influence of testosterone. The diploid cells in the seminiferous tubules of the testes undergo meiosis to form what? Haploid sperm cells. So make sure that you follow what the exam guidelines says on this. And then another tip that I will give you. I saw it on another TikToker's page and I was quite impressed and I went to actually follow up. So look at previous past papers and see for questions that are usually 4 marks and 5 marks what they have asked it. Like for example, DNA, meiosis, oogenesis, spermatogenesis, evolution, speciations. Find out what the memo says, how they mark the question. That is how you need to be studying it, because they will never change it. That is how they will want it. So make sure you do that. Now, a very important element. Do you know how to draw a sperm? What are the components of a sperm? The head, the body, and the tail. You know the acrosome, you know the nucleus, you know the mitochondria, and you know the tail. What does the tail do? It helps with what? Swimming. Exactly. Mitochondria provides energy for swimming. But what if they ask you, what would be the consequence of a sperm not having mitochondria or having a weak mitochondria? You first need to know what a mitochondria does. Provides energy for swimming. So if there's no energy for swimming, is the swimming going to be effective? And also, why do sperm cells actually swim? You see how now understanding the functions of these various parts now helps you understand questions that are not so traditional or so standard. You get that? Let's get into the female reproductive system. I remember when I was in high school, my teacher was like, you cannot fail a private part you have. It sounded a bit wrong back then, but yeah, you need to know those private parts. Fallopian tubes, ovary, a vagina, uterus, endometrium, cervix. What are they and what do they do? What is the function of a vagina? You might think you know it, you might know it, but how do you actually structure it? The vagina receives the penis and the semen during sexual intercourse. It is that passage through in which also a baby is born. Get the functions? Oogenesis again, the formation of the female gametes. What happens to those diploid cells? They undergo mitosis. Are we together? So make sure that you use the memorandum to structure your answer around this. Be able to understand a cross-section of an ovary where they talk about the process of the follicles developing. You need to understand what's happening where and here. But now another thing you need to know is the hormones. FSH, what is FSH? Follicle stimulating hormone. LH, luteinizing hormone. We have estrogen and we have progesterone. And the glands or structures that secrete these is very important. FSH is secreted by the pituitary gland, similar with the luteinizing hormone. However, estrogen is produced by the Graafian follicle. And then progesterone, it's the corpus luteum. Now you need to know the functions of this. For example, FSH, it stimulates the development of the primary follicle into a mature Graafian follicle. But remember we said that estrogen is produced by a Graafian follicle. Whereas now we just realized that the function of FSH is to help develop that primary follicle into a mature Graafian follicle. So what if we asked you, would there not being FSH impact the volume or the quality of the hormone estrogen? Do you see where I'm going with this? Because remember, with the FSH, it helps develop that primary follicle into a Graafian follicle. And the Graafian follicle is the one that secretes estrogen. And what does it do? It starts to thicken the endometrium, the lining of the uterus. So do you see how these things interchange into one another? Progesterone thickens it even further. So make sure that you understand the development of the Graafian follicle, ovulation, and formation of corpus luteum. They might give you a diagram where there's a primary one, grows, and then it degenerates, and then it goes like that. You need to know that. Uterine and menstrual cycle, you need to know. You could also be asked for negative feedback between progesterone and FSH. For example, if the progesterone levels remain very high, the FSH will not be secreted, as no follicles will be developing, since the woman would be pregnant. If progesterone decreases, FSH will be secreted and new follicles will develop. Why would progesterone actually decrease? Ask yourself that. The process of fertilization, that is when a haploid sperm and an ovum fuse to form a fertilized zygote, which is 2N. We got that. How does it develop from a zygote to an embryo? Zygote undergoes mitosis to form a ball of cells, which is called what? A morula. That is a biological term you need to know, which continues to divide by mitosis to form a hollow ball of cells called a blastocyst. Biological term, again, capture that. We spoke about the male reproductive system, right? Now let us go into something that I think you guys need to really, really understand when it comes to the human reproduction. We spoke about those two processes, and the structure of an ovum, actually drawing it, is very important. Okay, so let us go to this. Let us go to this question that I saw. So it says that a person undergoes a surgical operation to remove a particular part on a female reproductive system. And part B is the ovaries. So what would happen if you were to remove the ovaries? Explain why this person would not be able to menstruate. Let's talk about it. If the ovaries are removed, can the Graafian follicles develop? No. No estrogen will be secreted. Because remember, if the Graafian follicle doesn't develop because it's the one that produces that hormone, it will not be able to develop. So no estrogen will be secreted. Endometrium will not be thickened. So now you are explaining this answer in a way that you look at the hormone and what produces it and the function, and how the function will not be met. For example, in here we said that if the ovary is removed, the Graafian follicle will not develop. No estrogen will be secreted. And if there's no estrogen, what does the estrogen do? It thickens the endometrium. So the endometrium in this instance will not thicken. And no thickening means that there's no stretching that can happen, so no menstruation. We get it. Clock it. You are getting a distinction. Awesome. Let us move on to another topic you need to focus on. Okay. So let us go to responding to the environment of humans. What is the nervous system and what is it important for? Do you know what a stimulus and an impulse is? Let's talk about it. A stimulus is any change in the environment, and an impulse is a message carried by the nerve. You need to know the brain and spinal cord, the functions. They're definitely going to ask you to label or give functions. Know what the spinal cord does, and the meninges. Remember, the meninges are part of the structures that help protect the brain. Are we still together? And then I want you to know how to a motor neuron. Do you know how to draw it? Do you know how to label it? There's a sensory, there's an interneuron, and there's a motor. You need to know those three. Do you know what a receptor and an effector is? Very, very important. But now let's get into the things that they will ask you. A reflex action and a reflex arc. You need to be able to explain that process. Once again, go to the previous memos and see how they want you to answer it. But most importantly in here, it's your labeling. And when you talk about a reflex arc, when you explain it, talk about the receptor, the sensory neuron, the interneuron, the motor neuron, and the effector. That is how you need to talk about it. But now let's talk about something very interesting that I want to ask you. When we look at the concept of a synapse, why is it so significant? Why is it significant? Because it ensures that the impulse travels in one direction, that direction. We get it? Okay. Another thing that people tend to not understand or neglect is the diseases. Alzheimer's and multiple sclerosis. What happens in multiple sclerosis? The myelin sheath of a neuron is damaged. It is damaged, making it difficult for impulses to be transmitted. So it means that the impulse is slower. You get that? You understand that? And Alzheimer's, when there's the degeneration of the brain cells, destroying memory and thinking skills. Are we together? Are we still together, my besties? Awesome, awesome. Let me go to this. I thought you guys lost me there. Okay. We're not doing genetics now. Okay. So those two diseases are two diseases you need to go and focus on. Okay? You need to know what part of the brain is important for memory, coordination of all voluntary and involuntary. Which one secretes hormones? Which one is a connection between the two hemispheres? What part connects them? Are we together? That is what you need to focus on. You need to know how to label a neuron and give functions. Awesome. Remember, I'm telling you the most critical thing. You need to understand the correct order. Remember, I told you when you do a reflex arc, you must start where and you must end by the effector. Make sure that you understand that order, because you could be asked to make the order using the letters that are given on the diagram. Okay? Now let's get into the eye. Those ocean eyes. Okay, you need to know everything about the eye. From the cornea, the suspensory ligament, pupil, aqueous humor, retina, sclera, you need to know all of those things. But the critical thing here, eye accommodation and pupillary mechanism, very different. Eye accommodation is the adjustment of the shape of the lens to see clearly whether an object is far away or close. So it's the shaping or the adjustment in the change of the shape of the lens to see far or close. Okay. So that is accommodation for near and far vision. With this one, let me give you a pro tip. With this one, if you find it very challenging, just focus on one. Just either focus on distant or near. Because if you know this one, you know this one. For example, let me cook. If we look at distant and we know that the ciliary muscles relaxes, you know that if they ask you about near vision, the ciliary muscles cannot relax. They have to do what? Contract. Get it? Don't study hard. Study smart. Clock it. So make sure that you focus on one aspect and then the other one is easier. For example, the suspensory ligament becomes tighter in distant vision, in the other slackens. Got it? You guys are smart. And then pupillary mechanism is dependent on the amount of light that is available. Same thing here. If you know that if the light is bright, the radial muscles relax. So if the light is dim, they do what? Contract, clock it. You see how easy it is to study this part of the topic. So make sure that you focus on one if you find it very challenging. And then we have visual defects, short-sightedness, long-sightedness, astigmatism, and cataracts. You need to know the nature and the corrective measures. You know, for example, with cataracts, usually there's a surgery to replace the lens with a synthetic lens. So that is what you need to go and focus on. Okay. Another thing that I've seen they like to do, investigative questions for an eye is something they love. An ear. An ear is quite intense. Note, you need to know those 3 ossicles. That is one thing I will tell you for free. You need to know that. And you need to know the process of how hearing takes place. Very, very crucial. They will definitely ask you that. So describing the pathway of hearing is very important. From how the sound waves are being caught by the pinna. Do you know what a pinna is? Can you label? Labeling, critical, compulsory, everything. And then balance. You need to know the parts of the ear that are involved in balance. That is for learners who want to get level 6 and 7. And then also, when you're describing the functions of those things, you need to know the defects, middle ear infection, what causes it and what's the treatment. Deafness, cochlear, a cochlear implant, what does it do? What does it help with? Awesome, awesome. Make sure that you know how to answer questions regarding a part. For example, if they ask you about the auditory nerve, are you able to identify it? And by identify it, I don't just mean in the diagram you have in your textbook. The diagram that is not in your textbook and it's different, are you still able to identify it? Okay. Now let's get into endocrine. Endo and exo. Endocrine, ductless, and releases its secretions, which is the hormones, into the bloodstream. But exo usually has a gland releasing through the ducts of a body cavity, like a salivary gland. Remember, sometimes when you eat an orange, that those salivary glands there release saliva. Or when you're salivating or someone is eating something, you just see that your mouth is full of saliva. Yes, I'm a dentist, that's why I'm so excited about this part. Yes, very important. You need to know the various glands: pituitary, thyroid, pancreas, adrenal, ovary, and testicles, and what they release. This could be in section A. Hypothalamus, what does it release? Thymus. The thyroid gland releases what? Thyroxine. Homeostasis, we are there. Same again, if this is a very challenging part for you, thyroxine, blood glucose, make sure that you focus on one for now. For example, if we know that the glucose level are too high, the pancreas is stimulated to secrete insulin. Insulin stimulates the conversion of excess glucose into glycogen, which is then stored. Glucose level in the body decrease, then it returns to normal. There are 3 things we need to know. Glucose, glycogen, and glucagon are 3 different things. And this is where learners tend to lose marks. Glucose is the simplest form of sugar in the blood. Glycogen is glucose that is converted and stored. So the glucose that is stored and converted is converted into glycogen. Glucagon is a hormone secreted by the pancreas if the blood sugar levels are too low. You also need to know the regulation of carbon dioxide. And there are keywords. Once again, please have a look at the memo. I said you should check the memo as to how they want you to do this. Also, another thing with regards to this topic is labeling. They'll ask you to understand hormones, target organs, and the expected response. If a person is dehydrated, what is happening there? Which organs are going to be involved in the negative feedback of this? Okay? Plant hormones, auxins, gibberellins, and ascorbic acid. Is that what it's called? But you understood me. You need to understand the role in phototropism and geotropism. Usually for this question, they typically also like asking it in a very investigative questions. So I want you guys to also go back to your own investigative questions and find out what is it that you struggle with. Do you know what an independent variable is? Do you know what a dependent variable is? So it is very, very important that you understand the investigative questions. Good luck. Please subscribe to the page. I'm going to be doing paper 2 soon.